Melody Salesforce Flowsome.
Hello Flowsome people, welcome to the Salesforce Flowsome channel. For those who have joined FlowFest, I hope you had a wonderful time. For us, we were so excited about version 2, and this time I was more involved with the challenge design together with many other talented judges. And our learning lesson from version 1 is, most of the challenges are a bit too easy, so many finished all of them in a short amount of time. So this time, we wanted to step up our game a bit. But maybe we went a bit too far because some of the challenges got a bit tricky, and we also added 2 more challenges than before. And what's special about this time is we have something called Fix My Flow Challenge, which is we will give you a wrong flow and you have to identify what's the issues and then fix it. So we really like the concepts, but this is also new to us. So next time, we hope we can adjust the challenges to a level that's more suitable for competition. Anyway, we still had a really amazing time designing and discussing these challenges. And today, I just want to share with you what these challenges are, and hopefully, you can learn something from them as well. So let's get started. So this time, we have 7 challenges, and 4 of them are Fix My Flow challenges. They are sequenced from number 15 all the way to 21. So let's start from challenge 15. The challenge 15 is asking you to create a screen flow that allows user to easily create a child account from a target account. When the user launches the screen flow from that account record, the flow should fetch the values from that record. Then there should be a screen for users to fill in the account name, number of employees, and website. At the end, the flow should create a new account with the values from the target account and the input from the screen. Also, make sure the parent account field is updated accordingly. For this challenge, what we are really testing is if you know how to use record ID variable. The second thing is how to configure screen components. So let's just jump into flow. Okay. I am very proud of this, but I'm actually team freeform, so I'm just gonna change it into freeform. The first thing we need to do is we have to create a record ID variable. Basically, record ID variable is a special variable you can always use. So if you type in the name exactly like this, and then the data type will be record, and here you'll have to click available for input. And finally, just fill in the object that you want to use. So after you configure a record ID variable, whenever you launch your screen using an action or put it on a lightning page, you can easily fetch the current record where you launch that flow. So for example, I create that action and I put it on the account page. So whenever I go into a specific account and I click on this flow action, the current record's value will be fetched automatically by the flow. So if you're working with screen flow, try to always remember this record ID. It is very powerful. So once we create the record ID, we can just assume that whenever we launch this flow from an account record, the values will be fed into this flow. So the next step we need to do is just to add a screen, and I'll call it input screen. And then here, you can choose different ways to configure those fields. There will be account name, employee, and website. All of the fields, you can use this component. But the problem with the component is that you have to assign the value after you finish. So what I like is actually to use the fields feature. I love this feature so much. So all you need to do is just to fill in the record variable. And then here you can choose the field that you want to put on the screen. So we want account name and number of employees. So once the user launches the flow and they fill in these fields, the account record variable will be updated automatically. So you don't need to manually assign the values. So if you haven't tried fields, I highly recommend it. Okay, but the problem here is that the website field is not yet supported. So for that, we will have to build a component. So here we will just use the URL field. After the user filling this field, you can either, in the next step, use an assignment to update the account record variable. But what you can also do is you can click on Advanced and choose Manually Assign Variables. And then you will assign the value into our record ID and into the website. So we have finished configuring the screen, but what's also important is that we have to update the parent account field. And for that, we will have to use an assignment. So we update the record ID variable, and then we choose the account parent ID equals record ID's own ID. Okay, this assignment looks a bit weird if you're not familiar with the concept of variable. So I recommend to check out my variable video. But basically, this record ID, even though it's having the value from our target account, they don't have the direct connection. Whenever I launch this flow, what the flow does is to save a copy from the target account into this variable. So when we are in the flow, we can manipulate with this variable as much as we want. It's basically just a copy. So right now, what I am trying to do is I'm going to use this variable to create a new account. So using the copy of my parent account, I'm going to update the fields that I want to create a new account. So here, just think about for the new account, the parent account ID will be the original account ID. How can I get the original account ID? I can also get that from this current variable. So I hope that's clear. If it's still confusing, you can just leave a comment below and I will try to explain again. Alright, so we have updated the parent ID. What you can also do is, because if you're creating a record using a record variable, there is a disclaimer to make sure you clean up the ID field. So we have used this account ID to update our parent account ID. Now we don't need the ID field anymore. So we can just go ahead and then clean it up. That's what we need to do in assignment. And finally, I just need to create the records using that record ID variable. All right, let's see how it goes. So here I can directly fill in an account. And we use this one. Child and then employee. So if you use the fields feature, the fields will be pre-populated with the value from the record variable. And the URL, I will just type in a test URL. Then click next. And then it's done. So let's go back to our interface. Now you will see a child account has been created. And it's using every detail from the parent account except the name, the website, and also the number of employees, which I didn't update. And you can also see the parent account has now been updated with our original account. So that is challenge 15. Then we want to take a look at challenge 16. Challenge 16 is saying, create a screen flow that allows user to easily create a case. The initial screen should have two fields, subject and case origin. And case origin should only be visible if the current user is assistant admin. Next, we should create that case. If the case is created successfully, we want to use the screen to display the case number and an image. If not, we want to display an error message. Finally, make sure on all screens, user cannot go back or pause, and no headers is there. Finally, for the first screen, label the next button as save. So for this challenge, what we are really testing is first, again, configure screen components. This time we're going to configure display image. Second, we want to configure the component visibility. And third, we want to customize the screen header and footer. And then we want to configure a fold path, And finally, we want to get that system-generated error message through the flow global variable. So let's go into our flow. Again, I'm going to use freeform. So the first thing we need to do is we want to have a screen to let user input the fields. For here, I want to use fields again, but like we mentioned, if you want to use fields feature, you will need a record variable. So here we're just going to create a new case variable. Here we don't need to click available for input because we are not taking anything from outside the flow. Then I can put in the subject and the case origin. So that's the first part. The second part is I only want to show case origin to system admin. So what we can do is to configure the field visibility, or in other places, we will call it component visibility. So here we can just choose different conditions and write custom formula. So what we want is to say the flow user is having the system admin profile. But as you can see, when we are in the visibility, we couldn't choose other global variables than flow. What to do then? You can have several solutions. One of them is to use a get record to get the current profile. But the other way is you can also write a formula. So let's go to the manager and click on new resource and click on formula. And let's call it current profile. We want to have a text, and here you can use other global variable. So we're going to use profile here, and we're going to get the name. So now when we go back to the field visibility, we can then use the current profile in the formula. So here I want it to equal system administrator. So this is saying I only want to show this field if the current user's profile is system admin. So let's go ahead and save it. And the next step, I just want to create that case using our case variable. So if the case is created successfully, we want to show the case number. So to show any text, we will have to use the display text component. But right now, we don't have the case number yet. I'll explain what to do in a bit. And the second thing we want to show is the image. So that we will have to use display image. So display image is actually really easy to use. All you need to do is just to upload an image as the static resource. So you can access your static resource from setup. Then you search for static resources. For us, we have already uploaded an image. So all you need to do is just to copy the name of the image that you want to display and then put it here as the image name. So just easy to remember, image name is always the name for the static resource. And then following, you can configure some of the attributes of this image. But here we're just gonna skip it. So we still don't have the case number. What to do? We actually have to use a get record to get that number. So we will use a get record and then get created case. And how can we get the newly created case? Whenever we use a create records together with a record variable, once that element is executed, the newly created ID will always be populated back to the record variable. But the ID is also the only thing that will be populated back. That's why we will have to use a get records because we can only get the ID but nothing else. So here I will say new case because I use this variable in the create records element. So the ID should be populated back right now. I can just use this ID in the getRecord elements. So once I create the case, I want to first get the created case, and then in the screen, I can show the case number. All right, and then the next thing we want to do is to create an arrow screen. So let's drag a screen, go with arrow, and here we will use display text. And because we want to show the system-generated error message, we can use the flow global variable, which will give us the fault message, which is the error message if there's any. So I call this error message. And the way to have the fault connector is by first having the normal connector, and then you can drag again to get the fault connector. And the final thing we want to do is to hide the header and the footer. So let's start from the first screen. To hide the header, we just click on Configure Header and untoggle Show Header. And the footer, the challenge is saying that we don't want to see previous or pause, and we want to change the first and next button into save. So for that, we will use a custom label, and then we just name it save. So for other screens, you should be doing the same, but I'll just skip it here. So let's save and see how it goes. So I will first debug as a standard user. And now you see only the subject is showing up. And then if I refresh the whole page and then run as myself, which is the assistant admin, I can see the case origin is showing up. So I will just do a test case, click save, and you'll see the case has been created successfully together with the photo. And now I'm going to turn on a validation rule which keeps people from entering case origin. And I'll come back to hit run again. You will see the flow is leading me to the arrow screen, which is showing up the system-generated error message. That's it for challenge 16. So now let's go to challenge 17. Challenge 17 is a Fix My Flow challenge. I have a screen flow that asks user 3 questions: if they like dogs, if they like cats, or if they have pets. So I want to show different follow-up questions based on their answer. For people who like dogs, show them screen A. For people who like cats, show them screen B. For people who like both, show them screen C. However, if they have pets and like dogs or cats, show them screen D. Currently, the screens don't show up in the correct scenario, so please help to fix this flow. So for this challenge, we're basically just testing if you can order the decision outcomes and if you can write custom criteria. So that's come into our flow. So the flow should look pretty straightforward. First, I have the screen to show 3 different questions. And then based on the answer, I have 4 different outcomes plus 1 default outcome. So let's quickly go through what each of the outcome is saying. First, if like dog only, it's saying, do you like dog equals true. And second, if like cats only, is if you like cat equals true. And third is if like cat and dog is both like cat, like dog are true. And finally, if have pets and like dog or cat is if you have pets equals true, if you like dog, like cat are true. So the first question should be really easy to spot. We are saying if we have pets and like dog or cat. But here, the conditions are saying if we have pet and like dog and cat. So that is not correct. Here is testing if you can write the custom logic. So instead of 1 and 2 and 3, we are actually hoping to see 1 and 2 or 3 in the parentheses. So that's the first thing. And the second thing to test you is if you know how the outcomes will be executed. So it's very important to remember that the flow will always execute the first outcome that meets the criteria. So when you are putting the outcome order, even though this makes sense in the semantic way, in the logical way, you always have to put the most restricted option at the top. So what is the most restricted option here? It's actually testing your logical thinking. Now, for some people, this comes really naturally. But if you have some challenges in thinking about the logic, I think the easiest way to do so is always compare your current outcome with the previous one and to think which one is more restricted. For example, this outcome should be executed whenever the you have pets is chosen and one of the like dog or like cat is chosen. So just try to think about if I put this outcome here, will flow always come to this outcome whenever the criteria is met? If today a user say, I have pet, I like cat, and I like dog, this outcome is supposed to be executed, right? Because they do have pet and I want to show this outcome. However, if today I choose I have pet and I like both cat and dog, the previous outcome will be executed, which is not right. I will just have to move it up a bit. And then you continue doing so. The previous one is if like cats is true. So it's really clear that this is also not in the right position. Because today if a person chooses I like cat and I have pet, the previous outcome will be executed first. So then let's just move it up a bit again. And then continue compared to the previous one. It's the same logic. If today the person say, I have pet and I like dog, the first outcome will be executed, which is not correct. So I will have to move this up a bit again. And then you do the same with other outcomes. If like cat and dog, is this at the right place? The answer is no. Because today if the person say, I like both cat and dog, the first two outcomes will be executed first. So I will have to move this up too. And then finally, you consider if like cat only and if like dog only. So it doesn't really matter which one is where. Because if they like both cat and dog, the second outcome will be executed first. So that would mean if this outcome is not executed, the user must have only chosen one of the option. Either they like cat or they like dog. So it doesn't really matter about the sequence of these two outcomes. So now everything sounds a bit abstract when I couldn't draw on the paper. But the bottom line is always try to stress test on the sequence of the decision outcomes. If this is still difficult to put logic in place, another easier way to do it is just to try to make all the outcomes mutually exclusive. So for here, if like cats only, I will write, do you like dog equals false. Do you have pet equals false. That case, this one will be mutually exclusive with other option. And that's the same for this one as well. I will write, do you like cats equals false. Do you have pets equals false. And for this one, I will also write, do you have pets equals false. So in that case, all options become mutually exclusive, then you don't have to worry too much about the outcomes. So that's it for challenge 17. Then we talk about challenge 18. So challenge 18 is that I have a screen flow that lets user choose an account, and the flow will then clone that account. After the cloning, I want to have a screen that shows the links to both the original record and the newly created record. However, the flow doesn't seem to work, and can you help me to fix it? There are several notes here. First is that we cannot use another get records. Second is we cannot modify the create records. The concepts that we are testing in this challenge is, first, how to configure a record choice set. Second, how the create records element works. Third, how to write a dynamic URL. And finally, how to add hyperlinks in display text component. So let's go into our flow. Let's take a quick look of what this flow is currently doing. So it has a screen that let user choose an account to clone. And the choices is using account list, which is the record choice sets. And then I have a get records element to get the account that I choose in the previous screen using the ID. Then I have an assignment to update some of the values in that account variable. For example, the new name, I want to add the clone at the end. And then I have a create records element, and I use that account record variable to create a new account. After the new account is created, I have another assignment to update the original record ID variable, which is the text variable, with the ID from that account record variable. And finally, I have a screen to show the links to both the original record and the new record. So the link here, if we look at the hyperlink, it's using original record URL and new record URL, which is two formula resources here. So in the resource, we have an original record URL, new record URL, account list as record choice set, and a text variable called original record ID. So to find out the issue in this flow, first we have to do a debug. And I'll choose Marshall Kelly. Now the flow seems to run correctly, but when I click on the link, you will see that it's not really linking me to any record. This means that the hyperlinks are probably configured incorrectly. Also, if we scroll to the debug details, we will see that in the get records element, it's not really finding any records. The reason is because the choice value is saved as Marshall Kelly, and the get records is saying ID equals Marshall Kelly. So this is not going to work because Marshall Kelly is the account name, but this get records is using the ID. So let's go back to the flow to find out these issues. So first we want to look at the hyperlinks, why the hyperlinks is not correct. So if we open the hyperlink again, you will see that there's actually missing an exclamation mark in front of the variable. If you want to use a variable as a hyperlink, try not to hard code the variables here. What you should do is, since you have a display text, you can just go in here and then find the variables you want to use. After that, you copy this, and then you can use it in the hyperlink. Always try to avoid hard coding your variables. So let's look at the second hyperlink as well. It's also missing an exclamation mark. And let's save it. And the second problem that we identify is the choice is not returning the correct value. And that's related to the record choice sets. So if we open the record choice set and scroll down, you will see that the choice value is now saving the name, but what we really want is the ID. So here we have to change it into ID. Okay. Now let's save the flow and then to see what happened. Alright, now we can see the choice value is returning the ID, and the get records it's finding the correct record. And so now let's try with our hyperlink again. You will see that it's linking to a record. However, when I click to the original record, it is returning the new record. Why is that? Let's go back to our flow again. So this is related to the third concept, how create records works. So if we click to the create records again, we are using the account record variable. It's very important to note that once we use a record variable in the create records, the ID of this record variable will be replaced with a newly created record ID. So when we have an assignment after the create records, it's actually storing the new ID instead of the old ones. So this assignment is at the wrong place. We should copy the old account ID before we use the create records. So let's change this to a free form. And I'm going to drag this out and delete all the links. So what we should really do is first copy the old account ID, and then we can use the account variable in the create records. And after the create records, the new record ID will be stored back to the account record variable. Lastly, we also have to fix the URL. So what we can do is we can open this one and then we copy the whole formula, and then we can paste it here. And the only thing we need to change is the newly record ID. So I can get that from our account record variable and the ID. Because again, after the create records element, this one will be storing the new record ID. Our last concept is the dynamic URL. So you don't have to create this formula in this challenge, but it is important to know that this formula will return the URL to your org. So when you're building your flow, instead of hard coding, you should always try to use formula to get a URL dynamically. So let's go ahead and save this variable and then save this flow, and let's try to debug again. So just to make it clear, I will choose another account now. So I will choose Simpsons, Cons, and Higgins. And now let's try the URL again. So this one should link to the original record, which is correct. And this one should link to the new record, which is also correct. So that's it for challenge 18. Then we talk about challenge 19. Challenge 19 is create a screen flow that allows user to create multiple account records. All the records should have the same values except from name. First, I want to have a screen for users to fill in the account name, quantity, and industry. And the industry pick list should come from the account object. Then the flow should create as many account records as the quantity field that the user fills in. And the name should follow this pattern. It will be account name number 1, account name number 2, where the account name is also from the user input. And the note here is we can only use one create records. So for this challenge, we are actually testing if you can create a custom loop and if you can create records using collection. Finally is if you can write formula. So let's go into our flow. So first I want to have a screen to show 3 different fields. And here I will use the component. The first field is the account name. The second field is the number field, and we call it quantity. And the third field is the industry, so it's a pick list. So for this field, we want to have the choices from the account object, so that we will have to create a new choice resource. And here we will use the pick list choice set. Object is account. And then we can just use it in the choice. Screen. Alright, then we will have to create as many accounts as the quantity fields. For that, we will have to create a custom loop. So whenever it comes to custom loop, in my blog, I code it counter. So we will always need to create a counter variable. So I will just call it counter. And here you have many different ways of creating that counter. But for this challenge, it would be easier if you start the counter from 1. So we create a number variable and the default value we start from 1. Alright, so we will talk about the custom loop in a moment. First, we want to talk about how to create the values that we want. So once we have the input, we want to put an assignment. And because we're creating new accounts, so for that, we will use an account record variable. So for this account variable, we will update the name to the input from the screen. So we locate the screen components and then look for account name. But it's not only this, right? We also want to add the number. So for that, you can just directly write in this value. You don't need to create formula resource. So we will have this. And then we also have to add the number. For that number, we will use counter. I will just add it in, and I will explain to you how it works in a moment. Then you will see very clearly. So one point is, if you have fill in something, you won't have the variable or the resources selection here. So what you can do is just to add another line, and then select the thing you want, and then copy paste here. So our name should follow the input from the screen together with the number at the end. And for that number, we will use counter. And then the second thing is the industry. That will also have to equal the input by the user. Alright, so we have configured a single variable. The next step will be added into the collection. So for that, we'll also have to create a collection. Data type is record, and then we have to allow for multiple values. Objects is account. And then we will add this single variable into our collection. Alright, so that's what we need to do inside the loop. And now we just have to think about how we can increase this counter, right? So the way it really works is, instead of using a loop element, I want to use decision element. And then I will check my counter. So whenever my counter is less or equal the quantity, I want to continue to create the account. And whenever I create one account, I want to add one to that counter. So in each loop, the counter will just be adding one and add one until it's larger than the quantity. So here I will say my counter is less or equal my quantity field from the screen input. So whenever this condition is met, I want to go ahead and create one more account. So I will link that to the assignment. And then for this assignment, we are going to link back to the decision. So you actually see this is very similar to the loop element. That's why we call it a custom loop. So this is saying whenever the counter is still lower than the quantity, we want to create a new account, add it to collection, and then we go back to this decision to check again if the counter is still meeting the criteria. So there's one step missing is we haven't increased the counter after the iteration. So let's open the assignment again. The last step we need to do is the counter have to add 1. Okay, and then finally, when the condition is not met anymore, I am going to go ahead and then create all the accounts. So I'm going to use a create record and call it create all accounts. I'll create multiple using the account collection. Alright, so that's it for our flow, and let's see how it goes in the debug. So I'm going to call it test, and the quantity is 5. And choose a random industry, and click next. So you'll see the flow has been finished, and let's take a look at the debug details of what happened. So let's go to the top, and you will see that first I have the screen, and then the decision is to check the counter. My counter starts from 1, which is less than equal 5. That makes sense. So the flow will just continue to assign the account values. So you will see now my name is test number 1, and the industry is the one I chose from the screen. And the collection will add that account variable. And then finally, I will add 1 to the counter. So now it will become 2. And then it goes back to the decision again to check the counter. Now my counter is 2, which is still less than 5. So the same operation will continue. And my counter will add 1 again, which now becomes 3. So the same operation will go until the counter now becomes 6. So when the counter becomes 6, that means I have already created 5 accounts, so I don't need it anymore. So you will see in the decision is telling me the default outcome should be executed. And the default outcome is linked to the create records. So now my flow will go ahead and create all the records at once. So that's it for challenge 19. So let's jump into challenge 20, second last to go. So challenge 20 is a fix my flow challenge. I have a flow that updates multiple account records. In the beginning, the flow will input a variable called IDs, which is a text collection storing the record's IDs. Then, the flow will update each account's record's account source field to partner referral using a loop. However, sometimes the IDs has about 150 to 200 record IDs at once. Then the flow will fail. Please fix this flow so the flow won't fail again and to follow the best practices. And the note here is the user will never update more than 500 records in one operation. And just a quick note on this note. The reason why we want to add this note is that we want you to focus on the DMO operation limit instead of the element count limit, which is 2000. So for this challenge, what we are really testing is the IDs variable, but it's only for introduction. And second is how to unpack a text collection into a record collection using the variable concept. So for the IDs, since it's only for introduction, I'm just going to mention it here really quickly. IDs is a very similar concept as the record ID variable that we just introduced, but record ID variable can only return one record at a time. IDs, on the other hand, you can return multiple records at once. So it's a very good concept if you want to use it on a list view. But the downside of IDs is that it always returns text collection instead of record collection. Meaning that if you want to do something with the IDs, you will have to find a way to unpack this text collection into a record collection manually. So that's what we are testing here in this flow. So let's jump right in. So in our challenge, to monitor the behavior of choosing several records, we actually created a subflow to do it. So just imagine this subflow is mimicking users selecting multiple records at once. And now we will have an IDs variable, which is a text collection. And this text collection is storing the IDs as the items. So right now, what the flow is doing is it's unpacking the text collection using a loop element, but inside the iteration, we use the update records element to update the account. What it does is it's saying, I want to update the account where the ID equals the current item, and then I want to update the account source. Why this is not a good practice is because in Flow, we have the governance limits, which you can only have 150 DMOs in a single transaction. So once you have more than 150 records, your flow will fail. And even though you might not have that many records, it's still a bad practice because your flow might take a really long time to run. So what we should do instead is we want to unpack that text collection into a record collection. And then we can use the update records element to update the record collection all at once. So let's jump into how to do that. So I will switch into the free form. So the concept is easy. We actually just have to create an account single variable. This is a record. The object is account. And then we need an account collection. And I will detach from the loop. So inside the loop, what I should do is I should just use an assignment to update account record variables. So for my single variable, the ID will equal the current item. And then I also want to update the account source to partner referral. So the concept here is I create a record variable as a placeholder, and I tell the system that for this record variable, I want the ID to be this, and I want to update one of the field as this. So when we use the update records element at the end, the system will just fetch the record with the same ID and then update the fields that we specify here. So this is also to strengthen your knowledge and your understanding on the variable. The variable is not the equivalent of your record. A variable is just a placeholder. And as long as you have the ID, you can update that record without querying that record. So variable, very important concept. Try to really learn this concept well. And then finally, of course, because we're updating multiple accounts at once, we have to add this variable into a collection, and then we can update everything at once. So in my loop, I only need to do that. And once my loop is finished, I want to update the accounts. But here, instead of specifying a condition, I will just use the ID in that account collection. Let's try to debug. So since we have a subflow, it's actually a bit difficult for us to see what is exactly happening. But the subflow is only taking in 2 records. That's just how we designed it in these challenges. But in the real life scenario, you can get a lot of records as long as it's not hitting all the limits. So if we take a look at the debug details, and we only want to look at our main flow. So first we have the loop, and then inside the loop, I'm updating account variable's ID using the current item, and then I'm updating the account source. And finally, I will add that variable into the collection. So here the results is telling us that one of the record variable has been added. And then we go to the next iteration, the same thing happened, and it also got added to the collection. So at the end, when I'm using my update records element, it's updating 2 records at the same time. That's it for challenge 20. Okay, our last challenge, challenge 21. This is also a fix my flow challenge. The flow checks all the leads with the open status, and it should try to match each lead's company name to an account name. And if no matching is returned, it should assign a rating of hot, warm, cold based on the number of employees field. And right now, the flow is creating several issues. So first is the limits keep getting hit. Second is when the flow limits are not hit, the leads are not updated correctly either. Most specifically is the leads with more than 1,500 employees are not updated as hot. Then here we are testing you if you know how to use collection filter, if you understand the update records element fully, and if you can design the flow logic. So let's go into our flow. So here I do want to mention this flow is designed specifically for FlowFest, but in a real life scenario, if you have a lot of account records, you probably wouldn't use the get records to get all the accounts. So that's just something to keep in mind. There's a lot of ways you can achieve this solution. And sometimes probably flow is not the best. You might have to go into Apex and stuff. Alright, so let's quickly take a look at this flow. So this flow is saying that I have a get records where I will get all the accounts. And then I have another get records that will get all the open leads. And then I will loop through all the accounts. In each iteration, I will filter the leads based on the company name equals the current company name. And then if any match is returned, I will loop through all the leads again and update their status to close and together with the description. So when this loop is finished, I will just continue to the next account. And after all the accounts is finished, I will just go ahead and update the match leads. So there I will just use the collection. And finally, the rest will be the open leads, right? So then I will update all the open leads whose employee is more than 1,500 with a rating of hot. And that's the same for warm leads and cold leads as well. All right, so the first question, let's fix the easiest one. The first question is, how come the hot leads are not updated correctly? And the reason is because we put this hot leads as the first one. So it's saying that if the number of employees is greater than 1,500, update it to hot. But the second thing is, if the number of employees is greater than 500, we update it to warm. So if you have leads that are maybe more than 1,500, it will actually get updated twice in this flow. So that's kind of corresponding to what we have in the previous challenge. If you want to become really proficient in flow, you really have to know how to control the flow logic. So here, what we should do is we should actually update the warm leads first. Then we update the hot leads. You can either choose this way, or you just make the conditions mutually exclusive. And that will mean in the warm leads element, I should add another condition is number of employees less than 1,500. So that's the first problem. And here, we also want to introduce you a concept about update records. So with update records, when you choose specify conditions, you can actually update all the records that meet the conditions. So for example, if today there's 100 leads that meet this criteria, I can update all the 100 leads rating to warm. So that's just a tiny trick about update records. I actually learned it pretty recently. Alright, that's the first issue. And the second issue here, okay, to better illustrate, I will change back to auto layout. And the second issue here is the reason why it keeps getting hit is in this collection filter, we filter the leads from all open leads, right? So when we go into the loop, we're supposed to only update the leads that match the criteria, meaning we should only update the leads that is the results from this collection filter. So when we choose this loop, instead of looping through all the open leads, we're supposed to loop through the collection that's returned from the collection filter. So that is the concept about collection filter is once you finish the filtering, the results will become a new collection instead of replacing the original collection. So here, if you can search for the element, the collection filter element, you should see there's a new collection and that's different from our original collection. So that's actually the second mistake here. Instead of looping through all the open leads, we only want to loop through the leads that match the criteria. So that's the two arrows for this loop. It looks very complicated, but the concepts that we want to introduce are actually very simple and easy to fix. And that's it for challenge 21. Alright, I know 7 challenges are a lot, so next time we will probably control the numbers a bit and also adjust the difficulty a bit. Some questions are really tricky, but they are problems that people often bump into in real life scenarios. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this can help you to avoid those mistakes in your flow building journey. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, and turn on notification. Salesforce Flowsome, thank you for watching.